There was always a mystery hidden beneath the quiet silence of my grandfather's house. The house itself was modest, nothing extraordinary from the outside, but inside, behind every piece of old furniture, photographs, and gently faded curtains, whispered stories waited patiently. It was a Sunday morning, 2 weeks after Grandpa passed away. My brother and I stood in his attic, sorting through boxes filled with memories, dust swirling gently in the sunbeam, streaming through a small window. The floorboards creaked softly beneath us, as if they too remembered and mourned him. At the back of the attic, buried beneath faded quilts and forgotten photo albums, I found an old wooden chest. It was heavy, locked by a simple metal clasp, rusted with age. With careful effort, we pried it open, revealing a neatly folded American flag resting atop a bundle of yellowed letters. My brother's eyes softened, recognizing instantly what it was. A military burial flag, folded into the traditional triangle, representing honor, duty, and sacrifice. "Did you know he had this?" he asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "No," I replied, lifting it carefully from its resting place. The fabric felt surprisingly soft yet firm, the colors dimmed by age, but still vibrant in their own dignified way. Underneath the flag, letters tied in faded ribbon hinted at stories never told. Each envelope was marked with a year, 1944. Europe. My heart quickened slightly. We knew Grandpa had served in World War II, but he never spoke of it, not to us, not even to my father. I carefully unfolded the first letter, written in youthful handwriting, my grandfather's words clear and poignant. He wrote of uncertainty, of friends lost, of hope and fear mingled together beneath foreign skies. Each word was heavy with the burden of youth thrust into violence. He wrote of towns liberated, of grateful villagers whose language he didn't speak, but whose tears and smiles he understood perfectly. But there was one letter unlike the others, dated years later, long after the war had ended. It wasn't addressed to my grandmother, but to Grandpa himself. A friend named Sam had written it, thanking Grandpa for saving his life during a battle in Belgium. Sam wrote, "Sometimes the battles we fight never truly end. They just quietly settle inside us." Reading these words felt sacred, like touching the fabric of my grandfather's unspoken heartache. He had kept these memories locked away, choosing silence over the revisiting of painful past. I sat there for a long time, my brother beside me in quiet respect. The attic filled with stillness, our grandfather's unspoken stories, now ours to carry forward. Weeks later, while sitting in my living room, watching the evening news, images of a different war filled the screen. Cities reduced to rubble, refugees fleeing their homes, children clinging desperately to their mothers' hands. The conflict in Ukraine was unfolding in real time, but in those eyes, in those faces, I saw echoes of what my grandfather had written decades before. I turned off the television, overwhelmed. The flag from the attic lay gently folded on the mantelpiece, illuminated softly by lamplight. It seemed to stare back at me, challenging me to confront my grandfather's hidden truths, now mirrored painfully in modern-day headlines. The next day, driven by some internal impulse, I reached out to local veterans groups, seeking someone who might understand this hidden history. I was introduced to an elderly man named Henry, a Vietnam veteran, now volunteering at a small museum dedicated to military history. I took the flag to him. Henry carefully took it in his hands, eyes watering slightly. "Each fold," he said softly, "represents a story, a sacrifice. This one belonged to someone who carried more than duty. He carried the silence afterward." He listened patiently as I shared my grandfather's story, and then, almost hesitantly, I asked about Ukraine. How did he, a man shaped by conflict decades ago, view these current struggles? Henry paused thoughtfully, looking out the window. War doesn't change, he said quietly. Only the names, the faces, and places do. The pain is the same. The loss is universal. Your grandfather knew this well. It's why he kept silent, not because he forgot, but because he remembered too clearly. I thought about those words deeply. Days later, I found myself attending a vigil for Ukraine at our community center. Around me stood older neighbors, many veterans themselves, alongside younger families holding candles, united by empathy, not ideology. As I lit my candle, I realized something profound. Every generation faces its own battles, its own choices between silence and action, forgetting and remembering. My grandfather chose silence, perhaps as protection, perhaps as reverence for lives lost. But in discovering his story, I felt an obligation, not to remain silent, but to speak, to share, to support those who suffer now as he once did. In the weeks that followed, inspired by Henry and the quiet bravery of my grandfather's generation, our community began gathering supplies, sending aid, supporting refugee families arriving in our city. With each small action, we honored those who came before us, those who fought, who survived, who carried their memories silently, never forgotten. Months passed. One afternoon, I returned to the attic, placing the flag carefully back in its chest. This time, though, I left the chest unlocked, a silent promise never to bury these stories again. As I closed the attic door behind me, I felt the weight of that promise, heavy yet purposeful. The flag wasn't just a relic of the past, it was a living reminder of our duty in the present, to remember, to understand, to offer compassion, and to ensure that no suffering ever goes unnoticed or forgotten. My grandfather's silence had been his way of coping, but my voice, our voices, could become the means of healing, an enduring tribute to every soldier, every family, every innocent life caught in conflicts past and present. The flag in the attic had taught me more than history. It taught me responsibility. It taught me that wars end in treaties, but true peace begins in empathy. Whether in Belgium decades ago or Ukraine today, the humanity in us must rise above borders, beyond time, into something greater, a shared compassionate memory. And now each night, as news of conflict continues to flicker across our screens, I remind myself that behind every headline, beneath every statistic, are lives like my grandfather's, carrying silent burdens. We cannot carry their silence forever, but we can honor their sacrifice by ensuring their stories are never forgotten, and by building a world that learns finally to listen. Perhaps then, peace might no longer be something we just hope for, but something we actively choose, day after day, generation after generation. That, above all, was the timeless lesson hidden quietly within the old flag in my grandfather's attic. Do you have a keepsake that brings back memories? Feel free to share your story in the comments.